watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
I'm Mark Golub, and to reflect on some of the issues of the day, I have the pleasure of sitting with two of my favorite people, Steven Bayme, Director of the American Jewish Committee's Koppelman Institute on American Jewish-Israeli Relations, and Elan Steinberg, Executive Director Emeritus of the World Jewish Congress, now working as an international consultant on Jewish affairs. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me again.
Good to be here.
We have recently seen a flap again in the United Nations. There was a question as to whether the United States would or would not veto an attempt to say in the Security Council that the settlements were illegal and in some way suggested they were the real cause of whatever lack of peace exists in the Middle East. So I wanted first to hear the two of you just react to what ultimately happened. The United States did veto the resolution, but it's not clear to everybody in the Jewish community that the United States did it in the appropriate way. Stephen, as you watched this unfold, what was your reaction to it? And in general, what would you say about the entire developing story about the United States in the UN vis-a-vis the resolution suggested by the Palestinians?
Well, bear in mind that the veto was used quite rarely. For years, decades, America prided itself for never using a veto. I think the last time it actually was used was about 5 years ago. So in that respect, America was making a statement that it will not abide by such a resolution, do not regard such a resolution as worthwhile. They tried to persuade Abbas to take it off the table. And they were making a statement that America continues to support Israel. So in that respect, obviously, I did not like the timing of the whole thing. I thought the whole thing was an example of international hypocrisy. But I also would not be hysterical about the American response.
Elan?
There's a difficulty here. Israel is isolated on the question of settlements. Even the United States doesn't support its position. Indeed, even within Israel, there are differing views. What was clear and what did and should have motivated the United States is that the biased forum of the United Nations is not where this issue should be addressed. Steve is right. The U.S. is so reluctant to exercise a veto that it attempted to find whatever formulation it could to avoid doing so. Being unable to do so, they did exercise the veto. This, after all, this issue of bringing settlements to the UN is part of the quiver of the arrows of the Palestinians. They want to make their political point. That's where they go. They know they can win there. Basically, I think for the U.S. and for Israel, let's move on and let's now deal seriously with the question of negotiations.
All right, both of you, in different ways, have dealt with these kind of issues for your entire professional career. And I want you to comment on the sort of undercurrent in the Jewish community, which tends to see events like this, there are those in the community who tend to see events like this, as dire indications of an ominous relationship between Israel and the United States. And Jeffrey Kuhner wrote this column that was published in the Washington Times, in which he basically said that he saw the United States' willingness to go along with a resolution that would not have called the settlements illegal, but would have called them illegitimate. That somehow the United States' willingness to criticize Israel in public was something that was, in his words, almost unprecedented. To what extent, number one, are either of you concerned that the United States indicates any kind of stepping back from relationship to Israel? And to what extent do you feel he's correct historically when he suggests that this is almost an unprecedented position for the United States to take?
No, that's simple. He's wrong. You know, early in my career, I was a representative at the United Nations for the World Jewish Congress, and you have to understand, it's a kind of Alice in Wonderland world out there. It's different from the way things are transacted in the real world, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. As to his point that the U.S. has adopted a position somewhat different than it has in the past, like it or not like it, the U.S., indeed, like the rest of the world, views those settlements as illegal. Mm-hmm. Now,
but wait, has the United States said they're illegal?
In fact, yes, they have. We're putting aside for the moment the trickier question of Jerusalem. Let's just deal with Judea, Samaria, West Bank, whatever nomenclature you want to use. Yes, as I said, whether we like it or don't like it, this has been a long-standing position of not merely the United States, but indeed the rest of the world. That is different from the question of how do we arrive at a settlement. Not a settlement in the territories, but a negotiated settlement between Israel and the Palestinians. Indeed, even the right-wing Bibi Netanyahu has said there will be a trade-off of settlements for territory. Indeed, even he has signed up to the notion that there will be an exchange of territories. What it will be, 5%, 2%, that's for the negotiators. The real question is, does bringing this kind of issue to the UN advance the process or not? The piece you referred to there, frankly, I don't take it very seriously, because this is a person who, again, rightly or wrongly, is not a supporter of President Obama. Mm-hmm. So he would have found any issue with which to disagree with him, which is not to say he's wrong, but, you know.
But you feel he is wrong.
Well, I feel he is wrong historically. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the presidency of Jimmy Carter? And you're telling me that the administration of Obama vis-a-vis Israel is worse than where Jimmy Carter was? No, that's rubbish.
Your reaction to this whole argument?
Well, my gut reaction is, sort of to quote Abba Eban, Jews are the only people that refuse to accept good news. The good news about America is that time after time, American public opinion has stood by Israel. It's confirmed as recently as yesterday by a Gallup poll that was released indicating that it's 63% of Americans favor Israel over the Palestinians, about 16 or 17% would favor the Palestinians over Israel, with the rest undecided. That's a major statement that one commentator at the Council of Foreign Relations noted that 97% of the pro-Israel support in this country comes from Gentile, not from Jewish sources. Well, that's an incredible statement about America. No American president is about to defy that tomorrow. So in that respect, the Jewish tendency or the Jewish penchant to look at the glass as being 3/4 empty when it really is 3/4 full, I find that disconcerting. As far as the American-Israeli relationship is concerned, it is longstanding, and there are two components of it. Every American president has been opposed to settlements since 1967. And again, Elan mentions quite correctly Jimmy Carter, but while Carter was more outspoken than others, most other presidents said exactly the same thing. They do not regard settlements in benign terms. There was no news here in Susan Rice's statement about the settlements. What was the news was America's willingness to exercise a veto, which was a major statement that America does not want to stand by silently while Israel is being isolated internationally. I am concerned about the isolation of Israel internationally, but in terms of American-Israeli relations, I think we need to, number one, credit America and American public opinion, and note that the American-Israeli relationship has been a bipartisan one, or a point of bipartisan consensus, really since the origins of Israel in 1948. So for all those reasons, I found the Kuhner piece to be hysterical. I think it was appealing to some of the worst penchants of Jews to always want to hear the worst. And it did not put in the context of what the nature of American relations with Israel has been over the last 60 years.
How do the two of you personally feel about settlements? Would you use the word illegal?
Look, first of all, I'm not an international lawyer. I do think that questions have been raised about what is the legality of settlements surrounding an occupying army, and the legal question, as I understand it, is settlements that are meant to protect an occupying army are legal. Again, I claim at the same time no great expertise. What I would say, and I think Elan referenced this earlier, is that there are settlements and there are settlements. In other words, that anyone looking at the future of Israel is going to be in favor of a two-state solution, if for nothing else, for demographic reasons. You could retain about 80% of the settlers while giving up most settlements. So in that respect, I think Netanyahu's posture is that of Sharon and Olmert before him, and certainly Barak, is that the settlements are negotiable. The way to negotiate them is to come to the table in face-to-face negotiations and not try to appeal for an international sanction, which basically is going to satisfy no one in any case.
That's slightly, though, a different perspective. You're talking about now what strategy should be used going forward. I find it difficult to understand where the nexus is that suggests the settlements on territory which really belong to no one are illegal. What do you say?
Look, settlements, the reality is that the settlements at this point have become a bargaining chip. I think it's fair to say that the consensus, even within Israel, except in certain extremist camps, is for the sake of genuine peace, settlements would go.
In a heartbeat.
I think that's the case.
In a heartbeat.
We all agree that, Steve put it well, there are settlements and there are settlements. Some settlements are cities at this point. So you have to deal with the demographic reality, and I think that's what negotiations are about. In fact, I studied international law, and as to the question as to whether they're legal or not, you can make all kinds of gyrations. I think it's irrelevant at this point, because you have now reached the point where, except for the most extremist positions within Israel, there is a willingness, and in fact, there has been action in this regard, to remove settlements. And once you have addressed that question, then the kind of almost Talmudic discussion of whether they are legal under a certain international regime or not becomes irrelevant.
I think you have to add to that there's been a major transformation of Israeli public opinion in the last 20 years. If we had this discussion 20 years ago, we'd say, roughly speaking, about half of Israeli society believes settlements are a historical or a theological imperative, depending upon their historical and theological leanings. They'd say peace is never going to happen, and therefore we should continue settling without stop. That came to an end with the Oslo years, and the transformation of the Oslo years has been enormous. The consensus position in Israel today, barring a number of extremist elements, is that of a two-state solution. Within a two-state solution, the question of the settlements become negotiable. Do settlers want to live under the rubric of a Palestinian sovereign state? Obviously, that's one thing to think about. If that's what they want, theoretically, there should be no reason why they can't. The same way there are Arabs living in the state of Israel. Would they go for that? I don't know. I think that's an area of negotiation. As far as the settlers who are living directly in contiguous areas to the state of Israel within the 67 borders, again, both Olmert, Barak, Sharon, they've all offered rather generous plans by which most of the settlers could be retained within the sovereign state of Israel.
Trading some kind of land.
Exactly. So the real point becomes is that I wouldn't say settlements are a red herring for the simple reason that, yes, they're an issue that needs to be negotiated. But it certainly is a bogus issue to claim that settlements are the obstacle to peace. The obstacle to peace continues to lie in Palestinian rejection of Israel's right to exist. Okay. And that has to be faced squarely and forcefully by anyone concerned with the Middle East.
Forgive me for pushing you just a little bit further. I will tell you my own sense here, and I would just be curious to know to what extent are you comfortable with it or not. I believe that the appropriate solution is a two-state solution. I believe the Jewish community from before 48 committed itself to a two-state solution, was ready to accept the two-state solution in 48. And I believe that although there have been those who see and desire a greater Israel, the overwhelming sense of the Israeli people is that if there was a way to live in peace alongside the Palestinians, there would be a two-state solution. That does not speak, however, to whether settlements are illegal. And what bothers me is, if settlements are illegal, on what basis are they illegal? Is Ramallah illegal? If Ramallah is not illegal, but Kiryat Arba is illegal, then why wouldn't the same thing apply to Tel Aviv and Jaffa? What's the difference conceptually? Since all of this was the Ottoman Empire, carved up after World War I by the League of Nations, ultimately implemented by a series of international decisions that was going to somehow give national sovereignty to various groups in various pieces of the Middle East. And the truth of the matter is that the West Bank, as it's known, never came under anybody's sovereignty. And so the Palestinians had a right to live there, but so do the Jews have a right to live there. I'm now talking about legally.
Mark,
In terms of strategy, there's no question anymore that ultimately, if there's a two-state solution, settlements will either have to be removed or, in some ideal world, if Arab Israelis are going to live inside Israel, there should be Palestinian Jews living in Palestine. But I don't understand, but the reason why this matters to me is because if the settlements are illegal, the real suggestion is that Jews have no right to be on the West Bank. And I don't understand the logic of saying they then have the right to be inside the armistice lines of 1948.
let me explain it to you, Mark.
Good.
There was a 1947 partition resolution of the
Correct.
United Nations.
Right.
Effectively, under international law, it did draw the distinction between what we call ultimately the 1948 armistice laws. But if you raise the question of Tel Aviv, no. There is clearly a legal distinction between Tel Aviv under Jewish sovereignty and the questionable status of Ma'ale Adumim. Yes, there is a distinction there.
But explain
so I
to me,
don't.
what's it based on?
There is a Jewish state, certainly within 1948 armistice lines, internationally
The
recognized.
armistice lines were not created by the League of Nations, by the United Nations.
But the Jewish state was. It was recognized by states around the world under international law. There is no question. Now, the fact that Arab states or Pakistan or others don't recognize it means they are not in accord with international law. But what I am saying is, whatever the murky situation that applies in the West Bank, whether Jews have a right to settle there, is distinct from what I believe you raised as the question of the Jewish right to Tel Aviv.
What you're saying is the United Nations has made clear there is a Jewish state. We don't know what's on the other side of the Green Line.
Well, indeed, that's what the negotiations
But inside the Green Line.
I think Mark's point is a bit more compelling, is that the 47 partition lines are not the 49 armistice lines. Now,
Yes.
let's say for the sake of argument, Tiberias was not included in the 47 partition lines. I don't believe it was, but I wouldn't swear by it. But let's say for the sake
But
of
it wasn't,
argument,
but all right.
let's say it
your
wasn't.
point is well taken.
Does that mean a Jewish settlement in Tiberias is illegal?
No.
If that's illegal, then the entire Jewish state becomes
here
illegal.
we're making an artificial distinction between the 47 and the 49 or 48 lines, whichever you
48,
want to
49,
read.
right.
Because, again, as a matter de jure and de facto, the international community and the international regime at least recognizes pre-1967 lines. That is recognized.
I
Whether
understand.
those are final boundaries or not is the question to be yet determined. I don't believe that, again, except in the most extreme Arab camps, that there's any question any longer, and certainly within the international regime. And I have to tell you, even my years at the UN, there was no legal distinction between 49 or 47. There's a recognition of Israel within 67, before 67 lines.
What is the status of sovereignty on the West Bank today?
It's disputed.
That's right. That's disputed. And
Then why is it illegal for Jews to build there?
well, would it be legal for Tunisians to build there? Would it be
Why not?
illegal?
Why not?
Well, I think that's pretty far-fetched.
Why wouldn't it be legal for anybody to build there? At the moment, two peoples build there.
Because-
Palestinian Arabs build there, and Israelis and Jews build there. But why wouldn't anybody at the moment have the right to come to the West Bank and build?
We did invoke Jimmy Carter, who's not my favorite president by a long shot, but his language actually here was quite instructive. He said at the height of the settlements dispute, 1979 was the first time there was an actual resolution condemning settlements. The U.S. ambassador at the time, Donald McHenry, was very enthusiastic about framing it. Carter's comment in supporting it his comment was, I don't know whether they're legal or not, but I think they're an obstacle to peace.
Yes.
In other words, he distinguished between the legal issue and the substantive issue. In that respect, the discussion about legality at this point in time is in many ways beside the point. The real issue is what is the tactical advantage in doing it or not doing it. In terms of the legality of it, my own sense, for what it's worth, is that there is such a thing as a historic Jewish homeland. And in a historic Jewish homeland, I can't see any reason, legally or morally, why Jews should not be living there. There may be tactical reasons, and those are the ones that need to be discussed. But in terms of the legality and morality of it, I don't have a problem with it.
Split hairs here. There's a difference between living there, and as Mark pointed out, the question of under whose sovereignty you live there, and that's really the nub of the issue. I don't think most of those settlers are going to accept living under Palestinian sovereignty. I might be wrong.
I think you're right. Most of them will not. But let's realize this: the number of ideological settlers, who are there on grounds that God has commanded them to be there, that's really quite marginal. They may be very vocal, but they're hardly a majority.
Right.
Most people are there because of reasons of affordable housing and good living conditions, or whatever they find to be desirable. If there really was a two-state solution that was negotiated, that they felt could be implemented peacefully, they're not going to be an obstacle to peace. They would have to be compensated, and the government would have to do a better job than they did in Gaza. But I don't really believe the majority is going to be an obstacle. The ideological settlers, yes, they'll have to be confronted. And in effect, it's very hard to go against God's will when they feel they have such a strong perception of it.
My own feeling is that the settlements are not illegal, they're not immoral, they may be unwise. And I think that when people describe them as illegal, they're trying to blacken the Jewish reputation and in some way create an emotional advantage in a situation that is very complex and which needs a great deal of sensitivity. And I think we do a disservice to the State of Israel and to the Jewish people if we allow the discussion to be in terms of the legality of the settlements. I find no justification in a place that has no sovereignty to call one group's dwellings illegal and another group's dwellings not illegal, even though I have every expectation, and I believe the State of Israel, the overwhelming number of Israelis, expect there to be a sovereign Palestinian state one day, who knows when, on the West Bank. And at that point, the settlers will have a choice either of living to the extent to which the Palestinians permit Jews to live on the West Bank.
Which I don't think they will.
Which is another just irony that the world just doesn't seem to get. Why isn't the world outraged? Why isn't the world outraged that there could be a place where people tell Jews they can't live, and by the way, it happens to be in biblical land of Israel?
If a Palestinian village on the West Bank, decided they wanted to live under Israeli sovereignty, and somehow through the Palestinian Jewish National Fund, or whatever they would call it, purchased enough area south of Tel Aviv to establish a village willing to live under Israeli sovereignty, you think that would happen?
You don't think that happens now?
No, I don't think that happens now.
You
And
don't think
I'm not even.
There are communities now.
You are saying that the way public opinion is framed now, the establishment of a West Bank Palestinian village south of Tel Aviv, and again through legal means, so through say purchase of land, would be acceptable?
Why not?
Because it's a Jewish state and there are nationalist feelings here. And I would suggest to you, I would suggest to you, and I am not suggesting whether this is right or wrong. I remember my old college days. You distinguish between the subjective and the objective. Just as I feel, or I believe, that Israelis would look askance at the establishment of a Palestinian village within Israel proper today, I think that's the way Palestinians view settlements established on the West Bank.
Do you see it the same way?
Not exactly, no. Look, the precedent was established in 1979 with the dismantling of Yamit. That as part of the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, there was an agreement reached that basically said no Jews in the Sinai Peninsula. Now, again, as a Jew, as someone concerned with moral issues, I find that to be very problematic. But if that's the price for peace on a pragmatic level, most Israelis were prepared to pay the price, and I certainly understand it. We saw this in the Gaza Strip as well. It even got worse, that not only could no Israelis live there, but they couldn't even have orchards that were planted there. They had to be uprooted. So there is an element here of where is the outrage, that how is this allowed? How do you turn the other way and say, well, that's what the Palestinians want, so let them have it, even if it's barbaric at best and immoral at worst? That said, the reason we have accepted it, and the reason the world has accepted it, is a kind of pragmatism, that if that's what it will take to establish a two-state solution, yes, painful compromises will be necessary on all sides. In the ideal world, a Palestinian village south of Tel Aviv is perfectly fine, just as a Jewish settlement in Kiryat Arba is perfectly fine. The question is whether we're living in an ideal world. Right now, the reality is that Israel does have a population of Israeli Arabs that comprise about 17% of the overall population. And most Jews that I know regard that as, again, more or less acceptable, although they see some long-range problems on the horizon. That ratio will sharply shift if there is no two-state solution.
But how does a community like that differ from the one you're suggesting Israel would not tolerate?
I'm not sure what the question is there.
In other words,
you said...
There are Israeli Arabs who basically have their own community inside Israel. And although they're Israeli citizens, they have certainly their own culture, their own religion, their own traditions.
That's right.
And at the moment, they live under an Israeli flag. I don't know the extent to which they love Israel. I don't know the extent to which they're happy singing an Israeli national anthem
of course,
that talks about the soul of the Jew. But they do it. How is that different from your suggesting that it's okay for there to be an Arab-Israeli community now, but Israel would not tolerate a Palestinian community moving in?
The symmetrical hypothetical is not Israeli Arabs living in Israel. We set up a mind experiment. What if a village of 5,000 Palestinian Arabs from the West Bank decided to set up a village in Israel proper, south of Tel Aviv? Now, in an ideal world, it shouldn't be Judenrein, it shouldn't be Arab-Rein. But I'm telling you, the reality is there would be outrage in Israel.
I don't think you're right.
I'm quite
we already
certain I would
know
be right.
that Israel is not Arab-Rein.
No, I agree with you, but we're
It
drawing
can
a
never be
distinction.
Arab-Rein.
A settlement, at least in the context that we're using it, is placing people who do not live in Israel.
The analogy you're trying to make is Jews one day got up, crossed the Green Line, and settled in the West Bank, and the equivalent would be one day Arabs getting up, crossing the Green Line into Israel and wanting to settle. And you're saying that if they bought the land, Israel would not permit it to happen?
Well, first of all, as you know, they wouldn't be able to buy the land. But if we're drawing up this artificial scenario, we're dealing with the realities here. I agree. In a world that would be perfect, Jews could live everywhere. All world citizens could live everywhere. But we have a world of nation states, and nationalities zealously take care and ensure that it's their people that retain sovereignty.
So you're arguing that the Palestinians are correct to say there should not be a Jewish community on the West Bank in a Palestinian
You're telling
state.
me what I'm arguing? No. I set up a hypothetical situation to try to explain how the Palestinians see this and how we would see it from the other side.
What do you say, Steven?
Look, in the real world, again, if we're talking the real world, both sides want to disengage from one another. In other words, in the world we're talking about, the problem is they're much too close. And the whole idea of separation, partition, is a way of saying, let's put some distance between us. So in that real world, I tend to think that Elan is more or less correct in saying there would be significant opposition. However, that said, the real concerns are demographic. Olmert was willing to say, if you believe WikiLeaks anyway, that there would be 1,000 per year that would be allowed to cross the green line and do what you just said. Would you expect those 1,000 to be dispersed, 10 here and 10 here? No, I tend to think they probably would have some kind of community, otherwise they wouldn't be happy there. In terms of that statement, he was saying in effect that we can absorb a number of Palestinians who want to live under Israeli sovereignty, but it has to be kept within boundaries. And one would hope for symmetry on the other side as well.
I want you to comment, both of you, on the recent book that the Pope wrote, which seems to make a declarative statement that the charge of deicide was inappropriate, that the Jews are not responsible for the death of Jesus, and that in essence there is a step forward, even now more so, in Catholic-Jewish relations. What was your reaction to this whole story?
It's hard to exaggerate the importance of this development. Let's be clear. This has been church teaching for 30 years at this point.
Being?
The charge of deicide against the Jews, that they were the Christ killers, is false from a theological point of view, ever since Nostra Aetate and Vatican Council II.
In the year?
I think 65.
65, exactly.
Is that right?
Good.
So
Since 65, in theory,
that's right.
Catholic doctrine was opposed to the notion of deicide.
And let's
of collective guilt.
Of collective guilt. Actually, again, if we want to split hairs, the wording was a little peculiar because it said, and I think I'm paraphrasing, but this is pretty close, not all Jews of all times are responsible.
There are two nuances there, Elan.
Yeah.
One is that there were plenty of Jews living at the time that had nothing to do with whatever took place. So part of Vatican II's Nostra Aetate was a statement of you cannot blame all Jews living in the year 33 or whatever it was. And then they added on the second clause, let alone blame Jews living today. In other words, that it's a double negative against collective punishment. Not all Jews at the time historically, and certainly not Jews living today.
Nevertheless, I think it's clear that this has been church doctrine now for the last 2 generations, essentially.
45 years. 46.
What makes this significant, and it is no accident, one, that the Vatican publicized this excerpt from the Pope's book, and that the Pope himself decided to put this out there. Remember, had he done this through a formal encyclical, for example, he would have had to go through the layers of the Vatican bureaucracy and the Curia, and who knows how it would have come out. This came out the way he wanted it to. We're dealing with a new generation of Catholics. We're dealing with a Catholic Church which is no longer a Northern Catholic Church, by which I mean the majority of Catholics, I believe, today live in the Southern Hemisphere, who've had no association, essentially, with Jews, with West European civilization, and for whom this notion of Jewish guilt for Christ is a historic relic. But for us, and for those of us who understand what the theology of contempt was about, the Jew as Christ killer was the centerpiece of anti-Semitism, its very foundation, which ultimately found its expression in the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. So for this Pope to categorically state in the terms that he has and make it known that the notion of Jewish guilt for the killing of Christ is no longer valid and has not been valid is an extremely important statement, both for Catholics as a whole, but in particular for the Christian world of a new generation.
Beautifully said. From your perspective?
Well, first of all, again, the changes in Catholicism and its perception of Jews and Judaism that have occurred in our lifetime are nothing short of momentous. Mid-1960s, shortly before Vatican II. I remember riding on a bus. I was wearing a kippah because I was attending a Jewish day school. We passed by a Catholic day school or a Catholic parochial school, and I saw one young man spot my kippah and immediately, with a look of horror on his face, made the sign of the cross. And I asked people afterwards what was motivating that. And he said, he saw you, and he said, that's the fellow that killed Christ. The fact that you don't hear that today is a remarkable change. Catholic-Jewish relations have been on the upswing for 2 generations. It doesn't mean there are not problems. The World Jewish Congress certainly deserves a great deal of credit in terms of Vatican recognition of Israel. But obviously there have been steps that the overall trajectory has been forward. At times there have been stumblings. In terms of the current atmosphere, I think Elan is correct in saying that this kind of message needs to be reiterated and underscored, because there are new Catholics that come in that have not been exposed to what might be called the tradition of Nostra Aetate, as it's played itself out over the last 45 years. So in that respect, yes, I think the statement is very important. I think Jews need to understand at the same time that Jews and Catholics today are basically on the same side of the street, in the sense that they're members of 2 faiths that have significant differences between them, at times contradict one another theologically. But our major problems in the interfaith world are far less with Catholics today than with other groupings. And in that respect, again, the Pope's statements, going back from the beginning of his tenure, they haven't always been seen with such applause by the Jewish world for a variety of reasons. But the overall trajectory in terms of Catholic-Jewish relations has been quite positive, and that's something I certainly do applaud.
Do you like this Pope?
There have been problematic instances with this Pope. I think the most glaring problem we have right now is the issue of Pope Pius XII, whether he will continue on the road to sainthood. But
And you should identify this. This is the Pope.
Well, the Pope during the period of the Holocaust,
Exactly.
whose, to mix the metaphor, whose silence was deafening at the time. And he's well on the road to having been to being made a saint, canonized. I think he's already been beatified, if I'm not mistaken.
At that stage. Yeah.
He's at that stage, which is the interim stage. And again, let's make it clear. You began by saying, "Do I like this Pope?" I don't vote for the popes. You know, I'm not. I certainly don't vote for rabbis either, if you ask me. But and I certainly, and we as the Jewish people, don't pick and choose who the saints in the Catholic world are going to be. And it's a legitimate argument that they throw back at us when they say, "Why are you telling us who we should make a saint?" Because in making Pius a saint, you're distorting Jewish history. And that's the only issue there. If you were to say that Pius, who remained silent during the Holocaust, we nevertheless are going to make him a saint, I may not have an argument with that. I don't know what your criteria is for making people saints, but if you were to say that, okay, that might be different. But unfortunately, what they are saying, in fact, what they are saying is quite preposterous. Not only did he rescue Jews during the Holocaust, but he rescued more Jews than anybody else during the Holocaust. Now, we have to have some fidelity to historic truth, and that just ain't so.
There's no question the symbolism of awarding this kind of status to Pope Pius XII, the symbolism of it resonates very negatively within the Jewish community. Historical memory counts for a great deal. And in that sense, the efforts in this regard have not been positive. As I said, we've stumbled along the way. Even 10 years ago, under John Paul II, there was a Catholic document coming out of the Vatican that offered a kind of disconnect between Catholic anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. That kind of disconnect is historically untenable. So if these kinds of initiatives proceed, without question, they are setbacks in terms of Catholic-Jewish relations. But again, I ask people to take a look at the broader picture. The broader picture is that we no longer live in a world in which the Jews see Catholicism as their oppressor. We live in a very different world in which Catholic-Jewish relations are far more positive, in which Jews and Catholics can approach each other with greater maturity greater maturity means there's room for criticism, and there's room for criticism, frankly, on both sides. You know, there are things that we've done that I'm upset about. There are things that they've done that I hope they would be upset about.
I fully agree.
I'm just thrilled to be able to sit with the two of you. I love the two of you so much, and you both bring extraordinary insight, and I'm glad that I have a chance to bring you to both the Jewish and non-Jewish audience that watches us. Thank you both very, very much.
Our pleasure to be here.
Mark, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And those are the thoughts of Steven Bayme and Elan Steinberg. As always, I invite you to be in touch with us to share your reaction to the things they had to say. Please email me or write me this week or post on Shalom TV's Facebook wall or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.